Good afternoon and welcome to the second operational budget meeting for the 2023-2024 budget year. Director Matthews presented the draft operational budget on April 24th. The expectation was that Council would provide direction at the end of the meeting to staff with regards to the disposition of the draft budget. Members of Council requested more time with the presentation and the detailed description by department of the budget. Members of Council were provided with copies of the operational budget on April 21st for review prior to that meeting. During this meeting, members of Council are encouraged to ask questions of the Director for clarification, or any one of our directors who are all present for clarification of budgets and details. This meeting is being conducted in Council chambers and is being live streamed on YouTube. This meeting is called to order. The Chair notes that all members of Council are present and we have quorum. As this is a special Council meeting, there is one agenda item, the 2023-2024 operational budget. I'd accept a motion on the proposed agenda. Councillor Huntley, thank you. And for second, Councillor York, thank you. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. At our last meeting, we laid the budget on the table because we requested more time with the presentation and the detailed description. So we did have a motion that Council approved the 2023 Town of Kentville operational budget. At the time, it was in at the amount of $15,924,200. However, that number has been changed to $15,963,900 with no tax rate increase, and it was moved by the Deputy Mayor and seconded by Councillor Huntley. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Huntley, if you are happy to proceed to discussion with your name standing, then we will do so. Thank you. So it has been moved and seconded that Council approve the 2023-2024 Town of Kentville operational budget in the amount of $15,963,900 and that there is no tax rate increase.
15 million.
Oh, sorry. Okay, in the amount of 15, but I did have all the numbers,
You did.
right? Okay.
You did.
Okay. So we now have six numbers anytime we're talking. So $15,963,900. And further, that there is no tax rate increase. So the residential tax would be $1.5262, and the commercial rate would be $3.5034. Beginning our discussion, I will hand over the floor to Director Matthews to provide us with an update, and with she presented a few other slides that we'll discuss. Director?
Great. Okay. Included on your SharePoint site should be the documents from today as well as the previous meeting, just for ease. I wanted to share that our total revenue is $15,963,900, as you can see, with a 9.7% change, and our expenditures at $15,963,900. That is an adjustment from the prior presentation by $39,700, and we can talk about that as we look at the revenue and expense. So I'm going to quickly go through the expense portion first, or the revenue portion first. So you will see that there is an adjustment under financing and transfers that will be made clear if we look at the next slide, which talks about the expenditures. So you can see there is a change to that one under the other community development. So the amount of $512,100, which is small on the screen, but that has been amended based on an adjustment for the Kentville KDCL. We did have an amount that was equal to last year's budget previously of $120,300, and it is, my apology, yes, 120,300. And based on a conversation that council had on March 27th, an amount for this year would be 135,000 plus a 25 carry an adjustment for previous to bring it to 160. That was not in the original budget that was presented last week. So I've made that amendment. That change was 39,700. Because the substantial portion of that adjustment related to catching up from prior years, I've made that offsetting financing for that to come from the reserves. So if we go back to the revenue tab, that's why you see under financing and transfers the amount of change there. There is sufficient operational reserve to cover that. If we may have budgeted in the past for those amounts, not spent it, that would then have got moved into the reserve as an operating surplus, so we would be just making a charge against that surplus that would have been there from prior years. So that was the logic on that I wanted to make sure council was aware of how that was handled, but to bring that to the amount that was decided a month or so ago. We also, there was a question last time for a look at what was considered fixed expenditure levels, and I was able to kind of trace my way through last year's amount for that, so you would have consistency. And the total fixed would have been 12,309,300. That's adjusted for the amendment that I just made. And the expenditure level of 15,963,900, leaving a budget of 3.6, approximately 3.6 million, that would be available or discretionary really, where you haven't made previous commitments or had mandatory payments related to that. So that represents about 23%, and I believe one of the councillors that asked for that information. It was provided in advance, but wanted to share it here. So that was in front of you as you're making your decision. We also thought it might be helpful to share what the expenditures are for each of our program service areas as a percentage of the whole. And that's what this pie chart is intended to do. And you can see from that chart, I wish I could have a pointer for you. But if you look at the lower right quadrant, the bright green, education, housing, and transit, those are three of our payments that are mandatory, that are significant. They represent 14.5% of our total expenditures for the town, which is rather significant. You can see on the upper left side that about halfway down, our debt principal payments represent about 5.7% of our overall spending. And our programs and services are recreation at 11.9, administration at 12.7, transportation at 13.8, and protection at 22.4. So those are the significant categories and those percentages of total spend. And that kind of concludes the amendments that I wanted to share for today.
Thank you, Director. All right, Council, open to questions, whether to Director Matthews with regards to what she has presented or the budget as a whole. And as I said earlier, our directors are here if you have any questions specific to a department. Councillor Zabian.
Thank you. Thanks, Director Matthews. I have a couple of items here that kind of concern me. And the first one was, I don't know if you want the line numbers or the accounts. It was other meeting expenses for council. And if you want the number, it's 12114-38. Last year it was budgeted at 2,000, and I see this year we have a budget of 7,000.
Right.
Which is quite a jump, and I'm just wondering where that came from or why
Sure.
that's in there. If you can shed any light on that one first.
I don't have that up, but I
Okay.
believe I remember that one. I believe that is the 5,000 additional dollars that we would have budgeted for interpretive services. That we would have, is that not correct? Yes,
Yeah.
that we
Signed.
did include that within the overall
Signed.
budget for council.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other one is, under office expenses, our legal and audit was budgeted at 60,000, and see, this year they've got 120.
Yeah.
That's quite a huge jump. And then the other one I have as well is convention and travel. Last year was at 3,800, and this year it's 228% increase. It's up to almost 9,000.
Just gonna get to the same
Yeah,
page
yeah,
as you
take
are,
your
if
time.
that's
No,
okay.
take your time.
The legal component is based on what we're expecting for actual, so it is significantly more than last year's budget, but I don't expect hugely more than last year's actual.
Okay.
The convention and travel, it was a travel rate increase on mileage of 13%, so that would be embedded in there. As well, when we looked at our expenditure level pre-COVID versus during COVID, there is more in-person meetings and conventions, courses and whatnot. So we have increased it to reflect that increased attendance in
Okay.
those kinds of events. And it is, though, less than the pre-COVID actual.
Okay.
So it's still not bringing us up to that higher level.
Okay, and the one that I'm really struggling with, and is under recreation and cultural services. The salaries for last year were 387,000, and this year they're budgeted at almost 515,000. That's a jump of 127,000, and
Yeah.
I guess some clarity, maybe the director can answer, is that's just for recreation salaries, correct?
Right.
So, and I guess maybe we didn't ask the other day, or I didn't ask, is that position, are we promoting somebody, or is that a whole new position? I guess some clarity around
Yep.
that would be nice.
And I can start if
Yeah.
you'd like, and feel free to come up and you can add to it. In the package that was provided on April the 21st, we included an FTE schedule for changes.
Mhm.
So there is a redesign within the admin portfolio that changes a couple of positions. There is an addition of 2.6 people, and Rachel can speak to those components, but that's embedded in there.
Okay. Yeah, maybe if you want to
Or
speak,
sorry.
Director, if you could, yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
And I do want to apologize. I feel like I did not do a great job of explaining this last time, so I appreciate. I walked away being like, that confused me. I can't imagine that anyone else had that. Excuse me. I apologize. So I guess the larger picture within recreation, and we are proposing again 2.6 additional positions within the department. So part of the change here, I think that's confusing folks, is that we had someone who originally filled the facility manager position. That position was hired differently. So when we refilled that FTE, it was actually with a different job description in there. So what that means is that new position that took that FTE has actually been doing a lot more strategic work. They've been doing a lot more grant work. They've been doing a lot more OHS and safe, like trying to bring everything up to the standard that legally we're required to be at. And so that's kind of what has shifted within that position. What that means is that there's this gap when it comes to daily supervision and project management. And so this position, if you can kind of think, this is where the previous FTE was. We have one here that's been acting here, and then we're bringing someone in that's a little bit down here, and from a pay scale perspective, that really does those day-to-day things. The important thing to note is that both of those positions currently are being acted in right now. So the work is being done with those positions being filled. People are just being slotted in there right now because this is the structure that we need in order to be able to meet the needs of our ever-changing facility and department and community. So that's kind of explanation of one FTE in there with the park side of it. Within administration, there's a 1.6, so that's one position plus a 0.6. The one position is the Community Outreach Program Coordinator. You see this position sort of popping up in a lot of other municipal units, and that is to address the ever-changing programming and outreach needs of our community. So right now, our department solely focuses on physical recreation and recreation programming. We've completely negated anything to do with arts and culture, which is desperately showing in our community. It's also to address, I would argue that we're not really hitting the ball on youth engagement. I think there's a lot of people in this room that can agree with that. We just don't have that ability to do those things. And then the last piece is, if we're looking at the Homeless No More strategy that we have in this region, it's really clear that we need to start working on the prevention side of it. And so that position also does a lot of community outreach work, hence the outreach in the title, working with neighborhoods, working to develop those pieces. It's a kind of a really, it's the program piece, but kind of Kentvilleized. I just made that word up. And to rethink kind of all of those things to make sure that what we're doing is really intentional. I would say that it's been stretched a little bit with other positions over the years, and last year was the final summer where we said that we can no longer go on like this, and because staff are strapped and they're going way out of their mandate. So this is filling that gap, and then I think actually bringing us to the level that our community is asking it to be in. The 0.6 piece, that's where you're going to see the Homeless No More piece. The important thing with that, so if you think about that as a whole piece of it, we had talked about it, how the 0.6 was going to be just focused on Kentville because we have the highest stats in terms of homelessness, and then the remaining 0.4 was going to be funded externally. What we're presenting to you today is that actually it's put in the budget as a 0.6, but there is no town monies that are going towards that position right now. It is completely going to be funded by external funding sources or funding that doesn't exist right now. And that's up to us to be able to find those monies, if I'm being honest. Yeah. So you see 2.6 in there. It's actually 2 that are being asked for funding with the 0.6 just to hold that place so that when we find money, we're able to put them on payroll, if that makes sense. And the 0.6, to be clear, is proposed as a 3-year contract position.
Right. Yeah. And just to clarify, the 0.6 expense is still in recreation.
Okay.
The money that we're anticipating being able to receive to support it is showing in revenue.
Thank
So
you.
that's why it
Yeah.
looks so high in recreation, because it isn't net of the revenue coming in.
So that 127 is not for the 2 positions, that's for,
It is for the,
The-
it
just
is
the
for the
2?
2.6.
Okay,
So
okay.
when Rachel said we're hoping, or sorry, Director Bedingfield is saying
okay.
we're hoping to get 0.6 funded, I
Okay.
included that in revenue.
got you, okay.
Got you?
Okay.
And you also spoke of one of the positions that we have someone doing some of those duties now, but we haven't replaced them.
Okay.
So they're kind of, right, in some, they're doing kind of 2 jobs right now, so it's 2.
So, and forgive for this question, will that other person have enough to do? Like, I maybe I didn't phrase that very well, but
No, it's a good question. Sorry,
yeah,
which
no,
other
I
person?
I only wonder because, and I know you guys do a great job, and don't ever be offended by questions, but we're a population of 6,000. I'm just wondering, what happens if we don't do this? That's just a huge chunk, and I have to ask that question. And I apologize if, you know, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but it's a question that I have to ask
Yeah,
to be
no,
comfortable, so.
I actually
yeah.
really love that question. I
Okay.
think you should ask the question for everything.
Mhm.
What happens if we don't spend this money on this? I assume, which position are you talking about though?
I guess both of them, yeah. Or the one that you said someone's doing kind of one of these
Yeah.
jobs now?
Yes, so we have 2 people who are filling the different roles. So there's, yes, that's right. So the parks position, that would be the supervisor. So
Okay.
essentially, we need somebody on the ground to do all the scheduling, to meet with the community groups, to schedule the bookings on the field, to make sure that when we're doing projects in turf work and capital work, that there's someone on site. So if that position didn't exist, that would, I couldn't even tell you.
Okay.
I would cry a little, probably, but we'd probably have to pull somebody else from the office to be on site, which takes them away from that. So and then the other side of it, the position that has turned into kind of on the facility side, but a bit broader than that. That has really focused on the safety and the insurance piece and broader budgeting. Also, I should say that a huge component of that position, which didn't exist previously, is around economic development and event hosting, so pulling more revenue into our facilities. And so if that position doesn't exist, like you said, then I think we're losing an opportunity to be able to bring events like the Canada Cup, like the nationals and like all of these things there. We need someone to be able to do that work and to build on that relational side. There also is a planning component there. So when it looks like future green space planning, that falls to that position. When it looks like everything that I'm going to be bringing to you next week around facility, that position has gathered all the data and pulling that together. So that's a really key piece there. The programming position, if that's okay. I guess the big piece with that one is that there's absolutely enough work to do. I think it's a really good question. And what would happen if we didn't get that is that we would actually have to cut back on our services that currently exist, and we would not be able to do that outreach and do that preventative side. So what you're going to see with the addition of that position is that there's a lot more outreach to communities. There's a lot more kind of, we use the word resiliency a lot. So how do we build the safety net in the community? How do we get a cohesive community? When you're talking about our municipal contribution to population health, this is that position that's going to be able to do that. So how do we make sure that everyone in the town of Kentville, and we're about 6,700 now, we know that's going to grow because we are so great, can't help it. How are we going to make sure that everyone that comes into Kentville has a safety net so that when crisis does happen, like a pandemic, like a flooding, whatever that is, that we have the ability to really support them in those ways. So that's the premise there. That's what you would miss.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
And
Deputy-
thank you for that question. I really appreciate it.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. And thanks to Councillor Zabian for asking Director Bedingfield a little bit more disposition around the costs associated with the increased positions around recreation. I want to just take a note and look at planning for a bit. And I'm not comparing planning to recreation, because recreation has always been a very large part of the budget as compared to planning, because we are a recreation community. But I'd like to get a better understanding around the positions, that there will actually be 2 full-time positions, but because those expenditures won't commence until August or September of this year, so it's showing a lower percentage for the remainder of the year, but will then be higher as we get into the ensuing year. Can you just talk a little bit around what that actually looks like?
Sure.
Thank you.
So in the expenditures from last year, there would have been 2 positions. That would have been a director level position and a staff level position. And I'm not going to get the titles correct, so there would have been those 2 positions. This year, the recommendation is to have 2 staff level positions and replace that director position with a staff level position.
Mm-hmm.
That saves us money this year and into the future.
Right.
As well, we don't anticipate being able to fill that position right away, because by the time the budget is approved and we go through the recruitment process,
Mm-hmm.
that position wouldn't begin until as early as July.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are showing that position as 25% of the year, not requiring any
Exactly.
funding.
Okay.
So there's 2 components creating that savings: one, the delayed start, and one, the change in a director level position to a staff level position.
Okay, yeah, that helps quite a bit.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll hold any other
Welcome.
comments.
Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Worship. I've actually got a quick question, I think, for Rachel. Sorry, Director Bedingfield.
Still my name. It's okay. Rachel's fine.
So of the jobs that you mentioned, that people, I guess, wouldn't normally associate as Parks and Rec, is there anything that we've taken on that is not part of our, I don't want to say mandate. My worry is, as in all departments, is that we could be taking on federal or provincial responsibilities and paying for those because the feds and the provincial government have a very eloquent way of saying this is our responsibility fiscally, but we're going to hand it off to you and not support. So is there anything, I guess, in the Parks and Rec budget that is like that? Is something that you would say, you know what, normally the province would take care of this, but we're gonna open up this position and pay for it because we need it.
I appreciate that. I always push back on what people think recreation is, just first and foremost, because I do think that we are your commitment to community well-being. So that's really defined as broadly as we want. A lot of other communities define it as day camp. We define it as community well-being. So the only position I would say that's a little bit out of the ordinary in any of this is certainly that homeless no more position, for sure. Because traditionally, you're right, homelessness has been considered a provincial responsibility. There is no department in homelessness for this province. There's a Department of Housing, which is very different than homelessness. And what we do know, as has been presented to you folks, is that Kentville is kind of the hub of homelessness for the Valley. In part because we have a whole bunch of organizations that offer amazing services, in part because we're actually really welcoming. So there is a choice to make around whether or not, because it's impacting our community, that we can address it, or we can continue to kind of assume that someone else is gonna take it. I will say that the 0.6 piece, and again, this isn't actually funded in our budget, to be clear. The 0.6 piece is just for that person to be working in Kentville. And that includes things like our housing action plan that we've been talking about at this table. That includes things like emergency outreach that's working really closely with the new position in KPS. From like a dignified lens piece, those positions work really closely together. And then the remaining would absolutely come from an external source, ideally from the provincial source. That's a conversation that we're having. But I would say traditionally when we call recreation, homelessness doesn't fall under there. But what I can tell you is that my colleagues across the country, more and more it's being brought to recreation because we're the department that is in the community, working with the community and for the community the most. And so often when it comes to how do we have a dignified approach to breaking up encampments, for example, there's an amazing case study out of Vancouver. They go to the recreation department to do that in a way that isn't as abrupt as in other areas. It's kind of an ongoing thing. Ultimately, I think it's every department's responsibility. This is just where it happens to be housed here, in part because of my role on Homeless No More as well. Yeah.
Perfect.
That's a very long answer.
And I didn't mean to point out Parks and Rec. I think all of our departments have some form of, the police department gets downloaded on, Public Works certainly gets downloaded on.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the question. I think actually, the intent is, are we doing things that we shouldn't? We've had this conversation a lot, especially coming out of COVID, where we all stepped in to do things that were not traditional. And so I know I can certainly speak for our department. We've had to backtrack a little bit because it's impacted our, my staff's ability to function and operate at the level that we want to. So we're being really intentional about things. Yeah, if we don't get funding for certain things through grants or something, then we just choose not to take it on anymore, just for sustainability. Yeah, but I appreciate the question.
Perfect,
Thank you.
Director, on that note, could you speak to your role or the role of recreation with invasive species and climate change?
Oh yeah, and then there's that piece.
Adds the plate.
So the invasive species file actually also falls to that other position. I was kind of up to my eyeballs with parks and things, but that is something that's ever growing. So that means between the two of us, I have colleagues across the country. This position has been working across the province and at all their levels of government to find the funding and working with that community group. And that includes a community group that is out there who is providing really good, insightful information around invasive species. That includes things like Miners Marsh and how we're maintaining Miners Marsh, making sure that it's doing things in a way that also has environmental impact and protected species in mind. And it also means that we're working really closely with our Indigenous communities as stewards of this land versus maintenance keepers of this land, and ensuring that reconciliation is kind of in that whole process. When it comes to the town's environmental piece and our commitment to that, that's really Jen and I. What's your official name? Clerk? What is your official? I don't know. Director Bedingfield and this person. We work really closely together to make sure that all the opportunities are brought to the town. But again, it's very much on every single department's radar. When we meet as a leadership team, we talk openly about what does accessibility look like in every single department? What does environmental impact and our dedication to climate change look like in every single department? So I'm up here speaking to you, but this is, as a leadership team, I can promise you that we have these conversations quite openly and quite consistently.
Thank you, thank you. Councillor Huntley.
Thank you. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Because of the discussion that we're having on Parks and Rec, I have a question for you, and I don't even know if you know this answer, but here goes. Would you have any idea of the number of programs we have right now in Parks and Rec? And why I'm asking that question is because of something you just said a few minutes ago. You know, we're trying to change the lens on what people think a Park and Rec's department is. And even if I look at the town of Kentville's Facebook page, you can see things shifting to the amount of programs that are showing up. So I'm just curious really to how many programs we have.
So there's a lot of layers there. So a program can be everything from the Spike program, the Spike Fund program,
Yep.
to Susie's Fitness. Susie's Fitness being one that Susie's on our payroll and we pay her to do that. That's a Town of Kentville program.
Yep.
The Spike Fund, of course, is a program in itself. The Playbox program, the Play Initiative, those are all programs. We also, you see a lot more on our social media, a lot more traffic when it comes to recreation, because we also understand that recreation isn't owned by the town of Kentville. In fact, we very much encourage other people to become a part of this healthy communities movement. So you'll also see us sharing what is VCLA doing, what is happening down at Kids Action. And then sometimes you'll see our logo on it, and that means that we've partnered with that organization. So there's a lot of different variables in terms of all the things that we have to offer. So I don't have an exact number.
Okay.
What I can tell you is that we invest a lot in our summer programs, which is the campaign that we've currently put out there. And that is where you see all of those, what did Wanda say, Director Matthews say, like we have equivalent of 5 full-time positions that we hire in summer
Yes.
staff to run all of our summer programming. Again, that's very intentional in terms of, are we using equitable approaches? Are our camps geared towards climate action? Are they, like, all these different pieces? It's a really long answer again.
I know.
I'm trying to shorten them up, I promise. I could talk about recreation all day.
I know. And also, when you talk about summer hiring, how many do you hire that we have for summer grants for students?
So what we get and what we apply for are two
Right.
different things. But we did get 6 positions this year, and 5 in programming, 1 in the Visitor Information Center. And then we just got word today that I didn't tell you about, we got another position in Parks.
Great.
Okay.
So, and this is just, I can't tell you how many grants we apply for. So that money also, you don't see in the budget, it's a bonus.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If the funding isn't assured prior to creating the budget, we haven't identified it as revenue.
Mhm.
So that will be a windfall for the coming year.
Windfall. Like $10,000,
You know.
it's fine.
Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. Director Bedingfield, I think a lot of people are having trouble with wrapping their heads around the very large amount of different types of programming that's involved in recreation, and especially as well in the community where we think it's just throw out the ball and play. And it's becoming a lot more than that. I had the same problem with explaining physical education to people
Absolutely.
at one time, and this whole area has gone to take in much more than just keeping people active and so on. And, you know, your mentioning of invasive species and inclusion and accessibility, and we need to remember the library and arts and culture and things like that are all parts of recreation and recreation programming and things that your department is responsible for. So I'm thinking it might be good at this particular time that maybe our communications team could maybe put a little thing on to explain the umbrella of recreation today compared to what it was 10 years ago or even last year, because I think people are looking at the budget and saying, oh my, we've gone from this last year to this. And even in 1 year, we've taken on invasive species and we've become heavily involved in inclusion and accessibility. And all those things require finances to keep going. So that was just a comment that I wanted to make, because I know looking at the overall budget, it's grown quite a bit, and I think people just don't have a good grasp or understanding of that. And so that's something that I want to throw out there. But I do have a couple of other questions. And one of those I asked last time, but nobody got back to me, and that is under office expenses and professional fees. $500 last year, $50,000 this year. And so I think I need a little bit of an explanation on that one.
Yes, I would say that everybody does. $50,000, that's where, so when we talk about doing the study for the facility piece, so figuring out exactly where facilities are at, what the needs are in community. Again, next week at CAC, like I said, you'll see kind of a preliminary, this is our initial take a look at where our facilities are. That $50,000 has been put in to actually get some external support to give, kind of paint the real story about where we are facilities, but also where the opportunity lies within Kentville. To be specific, in terms of what the community is looking for, what the needs are, what the want is, and then as we move forward with the expansion of our town, we really want to be prepared to be able to meet the ever-growing and changing needs of our community.
Right.
So that's the professional fees that you see in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And one more question. Under recreation facilities, others, and park division spaces, 36,100 to 76,000.
So
Does that
that's-
include the dog park, or what is that?
No, so the dog park is capital, but what that
Okay.
includes is your $40,000 commitment to address invasive species at the gorge.
Okay,
That's where that money sits.
okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
All right, I'm good.
These are all great questions. I love getting this much attention. Anything else?
All right,
Yeah,
I'm good, thank you very much.
okay. And to your point, costs for all of us have gone up. The minimum wage has gone up since my first submission of the budget. It's, there's just,
But I think your umbrella is much larger than it used to be. It used to be a regular umbrella, and now it looks like a golf umbrella, right?
yeah,
So.
that's what we'll put on the cover page
I
next
think
time.
it's a little larger.
Yeah, I think, and I actually really appreciate you folks talking to your colleagues about this, because what you see is maybe the way recreation used to be is kind of emulated in neighboring communities. But what we've been able to do in Kentville is that recreation is really our town's commitment to the social prosperity and kind of cohesiveness of our community, right? It's much broader than that. It's much broader than making sure kids can access sport and all these different things. When it comes to, mental health, we talk about this with police a lot. When it comes to, just physical access, when it comes to anti-racism training, all of that is kind of within what recreation does, and it can be so much more, I think, than communities invest in, and it's that municipal contribution to the social fabric of their community. So if you could spread that word to the neighboring communities, that would be really great. Because those folks see what we're able to do here and wish that they had the same support.
Councillor York.
Thank you. I think it should be noted that half of us around this horseshoe have never done budgets outside of a COVID era. And so I appreciate your information that we are looking at numbers now that seem to have a startling jump from last
Yes.
year, but are not quite up to the levels of pre-pandemic budgeting. So that was very helpful. Thank you for that. And it's also been highlighted by, I think, almost everybody at this table as well, especially as it relates to recreation, that in order for us to maintain our service levels and to maintain the expectations and the anticipations of our community and what our community is looking like today, we need to be a little bit more progressive in our spending as well. And I think the budget, certainly in recreation, is reflecting the current need of our community to be a little bit more diverse in its offerings and be a little bit more reflective of the community as a whole. So I know that is repetitive to what everybody is saying, but it does bear repeating. So thank you for your clarifications today, but also the work that goes into it, and you as well. Thank you.
Counselor Gerard.
Just one quick follow-up. Professional fees on the facilities. Is that having to do with the overall recreation facility, or is that a private Kentville thing where we want to figure out the longevity of the rink, the
That's
pool?
Kentville proper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. It's just more of a comment than anything, and it's, you know, what to the rest of my colleagues around this table have said is that we're a community that's growing, and I see this budget controlled, a very controlled growth type of budget, which is great. And the fact that we have a lift of 1.3 million and 23% is discretionary, and we're able to add some of these positions in and forward our community in this manner, I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's a wonderful thing to do for our citizens. So thanks to all the work that went into it. Yeah,
Thank you. Counselor Zabian.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. Don't have any questions, but thank you for those, a lot of good information there. I just have some comments, and I just want to say that I realize that budgets are a lot of work, and it really is a juggling act to know where to spend and what to spend it on. So I want to thank the Director of Finance and all the staff. I can appreciate the time that it takes to prepare these. As an elected official, though, it is my right and job to ask questions, and I just feel, and I said this last week, that if the property assessment values had not increased so dramatically, the town of Kentville wouldn't be in this situation now. We'd be receiving this extra lift in tax revenue of 1.4 million. And this, again, is because of the assessment increase in property values. That's a huge increase. And we wouldn't, if we didn't have that increase, we would never, I don't think we'd ever consider burdening our citizens with this increase. So I think it's important to remember that we do really have to live within our means while providing the services that we are mandated to provide. And we should be very cognizant of citizens who may be struggling to pay bills, buy groceries, fuel, or other necessities in life, and we know that's just going to continue to grow. So it's really, to me, it's all about living within our means, and if we have to give something up, that's okay too sometimes. And it's been noted that we have the highest percentage of homelessness in Kentville. People are really struggling. So when I look at this budget, I see increases in some categories, and I feel that some of them aren't warranted, in my opinion. And I'm not talking about sidewalk repairs or basic infrastructure. Those we have to do. But, and I really appreciate all the work that was put into this, but the way it's presented, I'm urging all of council, to all of you, I'm pleading with you to consider lowering the rates for this year. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Maxwell.
Thank you. I wish I'd asked this question before Councillor Zabian talked, but I didn't know if we were wrapping up or not. So I have another question here. I noticed that all the expenses, all the expense fees for all the directors, the mayor and the CAO are all up over last year, except for council. And council is dropped down on those fees. And I'm wondering, you know, in light of what Councillor Zabian has said, why we would be raising our expense fees for all our directors, the mayor and the CAO. And if somebody could answer that question, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Most of the raises are as a result of coming out of COVID and getting back to business. So with regards, and I can speak specifically to my expenses at $10,000 brings my expense levels back to 2018 levels. In 2017, the mayor's budget was actually $12,000, and in 2016 it was $22,000. So those levels, although they are increased from the previous year, are not outside the realm of where we have been pre-COVID. And on the councillor expense side of the house, I'll say that councillors were largely underspent, and so it was an opportunity to, when staff were looking at balancing budgets, to curry a little favor.
Okay, and thank you, and I can appreciate the mayor's response to that. Pre-COVID levels, certainly, we can take some statistics out of those, but pre-COVID, we weren't in an inflation year, such as what we are right now. And all of our constituents are struggling with higher costs, and pre-COVID or not. And I think that it's kind of bad timing in that regard, to be raising all of those expense fees right now. Maybe another budget year, and maybe inflation goes down a little bit, or maybe in 2 budget years. But right now, when it looks bad for us to be increasing our expenses while everybody else is tightening their buckles. And so I'm just kind of wondering, perhaps I could get some feedback from other councillors on this, if you're good with it, if you agree, if you disagree. I think it's something that we should take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zabian, you've spoken twice on this matter. You don't get to speak again. No. The person who makes the motion gets to speak 3 times. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. So I just want to say that we've been presented with a budget, and we approved a capital investment plan of just over $6.6 million, and what we were looking at is the long-term cost of keeping taxes as low as possible. And our operational budget provides a balanced budget of just shy of $16 million, with no tax increase to our citizens. 76% of our revenue is based on the collection of taxes, and the increase of revenue over the year represents about 9.4%. And 54% of that increased revenue is required to fund staffing, salary increases, external partnerships, and commitments. And that actually leaves the town with less than 4% of the total revenue increase to invest in new programming and address our inflationary pressures. And I'm going to say that amount is just shy of the theoretical 4% tax increase required to meet good asset management and best practices to sustain current levels of service and maintain the lowest level of taxation over time. Our town is investing in people, new staff to meet the needs of our growing town, ensuring that no one is left behind through innovative programming to bolster our commitment to community policing, to curb homelessness, food insecurity, and access for all to recreation programming, ensuring that the town's approach to all programming is equitable, diverse, and inclusive. Initiatives to ensure that our growth is well-planned, meets the needs of our citizens today and long into the future, and considers the effects of climate change, invasive species, and a changing digital world. The town of Kentville has one of the most stable and lowest residential tax rates among Nova Scotia towns. As a council, we are committed to our fiduciary responsibility in the employment of sound business practices to ensure the long-term sustainability and economic viability of Kentville. Strategically, council continues to pursue growth and prosperity for all of our citizens. And I'm asking you now, council, that as we've all had our discussion, are you ready for the question?
No, I'm not.
Councillor Maxwell?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Maxwell, actually, you've already spoken twice on this matter. You can't speak again on this matter.
This is a budget discussion, I think, and I have questions, so.
You have questions for staff? Okay, then please go ahead.
All right. I would like to know from staff why our Apple Blossom Festival budget has dropped to $1,500. And I would like to know why if our Apple Blossom Festival contribution, which is community spirit, has dropped 1,500, then why we see that we need to have expenses go up? That's my question. Thank you.
I can speak to why Apple Blossom budget is dropped. I don't know about the expenses side. But the Apple Blossom budget is dropped, I think, I don't have the budget in front of me, but where we are no longer hosting the princess. That's where that, so we have to pay for that. I apologize, I don't understand, I don't know where to find the other stuff. I'm looking
Yeah,
at.
No, I was looking at if we're gonna drop it, we could raise it by.
Oh, okay, yeah.
right.
Yeah, no, that's what that's, so, yeah, I mean, I could go into those expenditures, the princess
I
expenditures.
guess my colleagues are all good with that other issue. Okay,
So-
thank you.
Okay,
I could add, and I'm not sure which individual expenses that you're looking at directly in programs, but overall, the travel rate went up, like the mileage rate for reimbursement because of the costs of fuel. So that is one of the expenditures that would be associated with staff. There would be, from a compensation point of view, there would be contract values and estimates, contingency built in there for future contracts that we're negotiating. Within that agreement, there may be uniforms, other items that would be embedded in there that might see an inflationary pressure, if those are the types of expenditures you're referring to.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was looking at council, mayor,
Okay,
Mhm.
great,
and department expenses.
great, okay, my apologies.
Counselor Zabian, you've spoken twice. Do you have a direct question for staff?
No, I just have something to tell my colleagues really quickly, if that's okay, Mayor Snow.
No, it's not. You've had an opportunity to speak to the budget and.
Could we ask them if they want to hear, would it be a problem if?
Yes, it would be, because it's contrary, yes. So I ask again, are you ready for the question?
No. This is a budget meeting of $15 million, Mayor Snow.
Go ahead,
So,
Counselor
Thank you, I
Zabian.
appreciate that, with all due respect.
3 times.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I get to talk a third time. I just want to note that, and I've looked at mayor expenses over the years, and Kentville has probably one of the highest ones around. So I'm going to pony back on what Councillor Maxwell said a moment ago. Perhaps we should have looked at maybe dipping, because that is a high thing, and I do a lot of comparatives, and that is quite a high amount there, $10,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, are you ready for the question? The question is that council approve the 2023-2024 Town of Kentville operational budget in the amount of $15,963,900, and further that there is no tax increase. The residential rate is $1.5262, and the commercial rate is $3.53. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed, and the motion is carried. Thank you. And we do have public comments scheduled, but they must be related to the budget only for this meeting, please. All right, there being no further business on this meeting, we call for adjournment, and the time is 4:52.